Hey everyone, it's Fox from Model Making Guru here, and welcome to part 12. I can count. Part 12 of our build of Bandai's 160 scale perfect grade Zaku 2 Char as Naples custom, but not done as Char as Naples custom, done as green. For ammo by Meg. Yes, hello. As you can see, I've moved forward a little bit since the last episode. We had the frame and everything done. What have we done so far? What I'm going to cover in this episode, as far as I know, because let's not forget, I always say, here's what I'm going to do, and then it changes because other things happen. So let's go over what I have done so far. As you can see, I've put the armour on the frame. What an absolute pig. A lot of it had to be really, all the paint and gloss varnish, everything, and made all the pegs and holes really tight. So a lot of it was a pig to get on. One of these back pieces doesn't open very well. There's a little hinge that pops out with the poly cap in it, and the armour piece goes in like that, and then when you put, what you do is you pull it back and then lift it up, and that's how it opens. But this is so tight, the piece just comes off. So yeah, some work needed to be done on that. Most stuff works. There were two panels that I could not get to fit on. You'll see here there's two panels on this arm that aren't there. That's because no matter what I've still got them, but no matter what I did, I could not get them to fit properly with the other panel. There's supposed to be a nice hard to see gap there where this panel sits on there, and same on that. Could not get them to fit. This one just sat sticking away like that. It was limited by that. It wasn't limited by the pegs or anything like that. It was literally, this was sticking out. So some bad panel fit on this particular moulding, I think. But I decided to leave them off, because then I can say, well, they've been damaged and removed. So what I'll do is I'll put some weathering on here that reflects that maybe they've been damaged. We have gone ahead and started some of the decals, as you can see here. Put some on test shield, and we've got this one on the head. That was a pig to put on. So I will be showing you applying decals a bit later. What else have we done? That's kind of it. I've still got the thrusters here painted. They need some tweakery. Everything's gone on the torso. Again, we've done some of the decals. I need to do some tweakery with these. Now, I have set myself a challenge by putting the armour on, but it got to the point where I've got different projects on the go right now, and I needed to not have either trays full of all the armour parts or lots of things on sticks taking up space. So for the sake of my ease, I've just had to put the armour on. So it does mean going forward, I'm going to have to be thoughtful about how I weather these things, because I have to remember there's a frame in there and everything else. So yeah, got the skirt done. So like, for example, when we do under the skirt armour and stuff, well, some pieces will take off because they're easily removed. Some pieces will just have to not do the interiors. Like here, I'm not taking, I'll open these up, but I'm not taking these side parts off of these because there's no point. They're never going to come off anyway. Some of these armour pieces are on so tight. I did leave things like there's a seam line here you can see on the leg. My intention was, and is, that obviously at some point someone will own this, and there are certain parts of the armour they might want to remove to have the interior exposed, like I did there. So I've not fixed those seam lines purely because, and you've got the same on the back of the leg, purely because the new owner, when this is finished, may want to remove that half of the leg. So, but we can cover up some of them with bits of weathering and stuff. It'll all look good. So enough waffle from me. We're going to start by sorting out the pauldron, which you can see here has been glued up and primed, and then we'll crack on and I'll show you 10 decals. So let's go and do that pauldron first. Back in a moment. First thing to do is the big ass pauldron on the left arm. Now it's only a few pieces. The silver piece here, you've got the green pauldron, and you've got these two pauldron sides, 3 poly caps, and that's it. Now I need to fill this seam, because when you put these together, there is a big honking seam right down the middle. Now I couldn't do this in advance because you need to get this part in, which goes into these two little pegs. So, and you also need to get it into these, stick out of these bits where the poly caps are for the spikes. So doing it first and then assembling it wasn't really an option. So what I've had to do is just assemble it loosely now. I've scraped paint off the tab that goes into that socket, and I've also scraped paint off the inside edge. You can see how it's red. This is so when I try and seal the joint, I actually get some plastic. If I just left that as primer and paint, it might struggle a bit. This way it'll dissolve some of the plastic and I'll get some glue coming up to seal the seam. So I can't remember if I've shown you seam sealing on this build so far yet. So let's show you now. So we want to basically stick this together. We want to get rid of this seam line right down the middle. So it couldn't be easier. Basically get your Get your pieces almost together. It's quite a tight fit, I have to say. And what I need to do now is get myself some Tamiya extra thin glue. Yes. Note, by the way, I painted the inside because I knew it doesn't really matter. You're not really going to see in there once this is on the shoulder. So if I get a little bit of glue on here, it doesn't really matter, and that's going to be quite weathered in there anyway, so it's not really the end of the world. Here I haven't painted because there's no point painting it and then sealing the seam and then having to repaint it. So let's get some glue on the go. So we're going to put some glue on these edges. Now again, ideally what you do is all this before you actually do any painting or priming, but I figured once that little piece of inner frame was inside, it was going to be really a nightmare to paint this pauldron without then repainting the inner frame part green as well. So I just figured, hey, why don't we just paint that bit first? So I'll give it a second. Now what I'm going to do is, as best I can, because this is a very tight fit, squash these pieces together. And just as they go together, put a little bit more glue in there. Tamiya extra thin is great because it dries reasonably fast, but it is thin enough to get into all the little crooks and nannies, so that's the advantage of it. And then push and hope it actually fits together. Yeah, it's quite a tight fit, quite a tight fit. So you see here, and this is actually the one I've done this now, it's actually quite a good example of how this works because the splooge is pink. But you see here how this stuff is coming out of the middle. This is the plastic. The glue is a welding glue, as I've told you before, and it melts the plastic, and when the plastic melts and you squish it, it bubbles up, squidges up out of the seam. So basically you're filling the seam with the model itself, with its own plastic. That's how this works. Just squish that bit. But it's just kind of handy that at this point you can see it more obviously on this particular model because it's coming up pink. Because I've taken that paint and primer off of the plastic to make sure it sticks. If I just left paint and primer on there, this would still probably work, but what more likely you will bubble up is paint and primer, and then when you sand it away it wouldn't really fill the gap. You're wanting to fill the gap with the plastic from the kit. So that's now squidged together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get it on camera. Looks like a big daddy, doesn't it? With only 3 eyes. Hello. We'll leave this for about an hour or two. And then, when it's had about an hour or two, we'll try giving it a jolly good sand. I might need to leave it longer than that, but we'll see. We'll try giving it a jolly good sand. And hopefully there's enough plastic smooshed out of the gap to seal it. If there's not, we can come back with a different kind of glue to seal any little remaining pits and bubbles. So let's leave that to cure like a good boy. Okay, right, well here is the pauldron, and if you remember last time we saw this, it just been stuck together and it had the glue down the middle. That's now been sanded back because the glue filled the gap and you have no gap. Now it's a little rough and ready where I sanded it. That is the case, but that's kind of inspired my next thought, because what I did was basically sand it back, give it a quick primer coat, just have a look and see were there any still little marks. There were a few, so I sanded it a bit more, put some more primer on now, and although there's a couple of little marks, I can live with it. You're not going to see the join. It's informed how I want to paint this. It's made me think, basically. I knew I wasn't going to paint it the same colour scheme as the rest of the Zaku. It's supposed to be like a found piece of equipment. What we're going to do is we're going to paint it in a different method to normal. So I'm going to take these things off, if I can get them off. I put these on primarily just to stop me spraying the polycaps. As you can see there's the join line still. So what we're going to do is something a bit different. So let me go and get the paints and everything ready, and then we'll see if this idea I've got works. Back in a second. Okay, right, what we're going to be using, we're going to be using 3 colours. Medium blue, AMIG 103, satin black, AMIG 032, because I haven't got any matte black, and cold grey, AMIG 119. Now what you can see here is that I have mixed a little bit of these three together, and I've got this nice sort of dark blue colour. So what we're going to do, we're going to take, instead of using thinners, I'm going to use a little bit of water, just a tiny amount of water, just to thin it ever so slightly. See here. And what we're going to try and do is brush paint. I've been watching lots of Warhammer and Games Workshop things, so I thought I'd give this a try. So we've got this is actually the MIG one-shot primer, the black. It's really, really nice. Get some. I've not tried it before apart from on this model now. So, and we're just going to brush this on. The rough and readiness of the sanding, where I'd done the painting myself, where I'd done the filling and then priming and sanding back, suggested to me keep this looking rough and ready. So that's what I'm going to do. So we're doing a quick base coat now, if I could do it without losing somewhere to hold it. Now when I primed it, I didn't prime the inside, that's still green. I've got a plan for the outside, but there you go. But this is just for the, I need to, you know what I need? Got the brush in my mouth, hang on. Sorry, I had the brush in my mouth then. So what we're doing is we're just very quickly painting this on, very carelessly and rough and ready. So this is just a mix of, if I remember right, this is it's mostly the medium blue with a little hint of black, of the satin black. So it'll probably be a little bit shiny, but it doesn't matter, it's going to get matte varnished and gloss varnished and everything else. So I'm just laying it on there roughly. And I've not really tried, I've used, you saw me earlier on, I used in one of the other videos, I used the paint thin with water to make a wash. I've not actually tried just thinning the paint a little bit to make a slightly thinner paint. So let's let that dry for a little bit. You can see it's kind of rough and tumble. That's fine. That's what I'm looking for. So let's leave that to dry for, I'll tell you what I will do, just in case. You can actually see what a difference, with it slightly thin, what a difference the black undercoat makes. You can see here that's the actual colour of the blue. And then with the black it's actually darker, but that's fine. So I'm going to leave that to dry for a few minutes. When we come back we'll do another coat. So back in a moment. Okay, so you can see that's dried mostly now. So we're going to go over with a second coat. Just get some of that paint. Go over with a second coat just to block it even more. And again, I'm not going too heavy. I'm not worrying about the texture. I'm actually quite hoping that I do get some brushy texture to this. Not necessarily brush marks straight out, but a bit rough and ready might work quite nicely. So let's just get that on. Like I say, yeah, I've been watching a lot of Warhammer stuff and Games Workshop stuff, and I've been really intrigued by that method of applying paints. It's a lot of it is brushwork, so I thought I'd give it a try on this, but using ammo paints to see what happens. Because if you can use ammo paints to paint your miniatures, then bonus. Because I've got a load of ammo paints, so you know, I'm thinking of getting into painting of some of the vehicles maybe. So if I can use the paints I've already got, fantastic. And I'm sure they seem to be working pretty well. So what we have now is rough and ready. And if I was looking for a perfect finish, I'd probably go for a third coat. But now we have a rough and ready, dark blue colour. So let's let that dry, and then we'll go in with the next great big plan. Back in a moment. Now for the next step, I've added a little of the cold grey to that blue, just to lighten it a little bit. Now this may or may not work, probably won't work, but what I'm going to do is a little bit of stippling now. I said I wanted this to have a slightly rough texture to it, so this is where we might get some of the texture. Now apologies, this tissue might blow out the colour. So I'm taking a rough old brush, it's reasonably stiff bristles, getting handy with the paint. Again, this has got maybe a little bit of water just to thin it down a little bit. And all I'm going to do, I'm not using a soft brush for this deliberately. I've used this brush for rust before and it worked quite well. So what I want to do is just kind of stipple on some of this lighter colour. Now it's not a lot lighter, not massively lighter, but we're going to do it in a couple of stages. So let's just get this on. Now it may not do much at all. I may have mixed a colour that's not that different, but that's fine because I don't want it to be an obvious change. Get some more paint on there, see if we can. Let's just drag it across the desk, why don't we? Get some more paint on there. Maybe took too much off last time, so let's try again, shall we? Again, I don't mind if it looks a bit rough and ready, that's absolutely fine. Just carelessly spackling or stippling it on. Now in some of my other videos you'll have watched me do the rust on the transit. It's exactly the same on the transit van. It's exactly the same principle. But I'm doing this as a slightly lighter blue. Let's get a little bit of water maybe, just to get some more of that blue coming out. Again, I'm not using thinners at all, just using water. Oops, if I could stop throwing the piece around, that'd be really good. Now when you do any kind of stippling like this, it may look a bit drastic straight away, because it'll look really bright, but as it darkens, and if you do it on camera, as it darkens and dries, it will obviously darken, because I said the word darken there at the wrong time. So let's get that on. Okay, so that's kind of an effect I was looking for, just a kind of stipply speckly effect. It might not even come out on camera, but across the whole surface. Now I'm going to need to mix some more paint because I ran out. But luckily it doesn't really matter if the colour's not exactly the same. So let me go and mix some more paint and we'll come back and do a bit more of that. Back in a second. Okay, so now we've got some more paint mixed. Let's give that a try. It's probably been a slightly different colour to the one we had last time, because that's how mixing paints works. You never get the same colour twice, unless you're scientific about it, which I'm not. So again, we're going to... Oh, do you know? If I could stop dropping things. I've just kind of given up smoking, so I'm a bit wobbly-handed at the minute, because I've been drinking lots of coffee to make up for that fact. So I'm a bit jittery. Okay, so that's more what we're looking for. So this is quite nice, and I'm doing it with this crusty old stiff brush because I want this kind of gritty, grainy, spackly effect. In some places it's going to give me a nice smooth, where I've painted a lot on, it's going to give me a smooth finish. In some places it's going to be kind of spackly and spotty and grainy. That's fine. I could use a smooth brush, but it just looked like an airbrush fade. And I wanted to try this method, and I also really just I couldn't be bothered getting the airbrush out. I'll be really honest with you. I was like, oh, airbrush out. Yeah, I've got other things to do today, so there we go. So I'm just building up more on the top here. And there is something to be said for this kind of stippling technique. As long as you don't expect a glassy, smooth surface, you can get some wonderful effects with it. Now I like to think this pauldron as being some, you know, if it was a normal human-sized suit of armour, it'd be some big-ass piece of iron that's hardcore and built to withstand all kinds of stuff. So I like to think on this Zaku, it's equally some, oh, do you know, it's equally some hardcore piece of metal that's not designed to look good. It's also not designed to be hitting the camera every 5 minutes. Sorry about that. So you're going to get some rough textures. So there we go, that's on. It's quite nice actually. So it fades down to the dark blue at the bottom, kind of randomly. Again, I've not taken care about this, I've not thought about it. It's probably not even been in focus for half of this. Okay, so that's done. That's part 2. I think what we want to do is do one more lighter shade. So let's let that dry for a minute. The reason I keep stopping with mixing paints and things like that is I'm leaving this to dry for like 4 or 5 minutes. I don't want to mix the paint, then wait for this to dry, and then the paint's gone dry. So I'll go and let this dry for a minute, go mix some even lighter paint. So I'll basically just add some more of the cold grey to my blue. I'm just adding the colour to the medium blue now. I'm not adding the satin black in there. As I say, it's still green down there. Don't worry about this edge. I've got a massive plan for that. So let me go and let that dry, and we'll go and mix some more paint, and we'll come back and we'll do another little light stipple coat. Back in a moment. Okay, now for the last one. I've mixed myself an even lighter colour, so I'm just going to get some. I'm not even cleaning this brush off. This is a kind of chaotic method. I've let this dry for a minute or two, but I've not even cleaned the brush off, because I don't mind if the colour mixes. Get a chunk of it off on paper. And then we'll go and do the same again, but less this time, because obviously we've got most of the blue on there. We don't need quite so much of it this time. Now this does give me flashbacks to a painting I did when I was at school in A-level, which was all, it was based on Picasso's blue period, so it was all blue, but it was painted with acrylics on card, and I didn't have an airbrush because this was like, you know, the 1980s, so I just kind of winged it and spackled it like this, and it came out looking pretty good. So what I'm doing now is I'm actually lessening how hard I'm pressing down. I'm reducing the amount of pressure I'm putting on there around the edge. So down here I'm pressing quite firmly, and probably not on camera. As I'm getting towards the edge, I'm pressing more lightly and almost less pressing. I'm kind of going with the edge now as well. I really no idea where the camera is. And this means I can kind of fade it. As the brush runs out of paint, I can fade it down towards the edge. So you can see here I'm doing it like this now. I'm not pressing down. And you get a sort of slight fade effect. But I want this kind of speckly, bitty quality to it. Just make sure there's nothing left on the brush there at all, almost. And that's why I'm using this stiff brush as well. Just because if I used a soft, fluffy brush, it would still work, but you get a whole different set of effects. With the stiff brush, I can go from a fully laden brush to almost no paint, and I can gently bounce it off. If you see it's bouncing off now. It takes a while to build it up once there's not much left on there. And apologies if this is all out of focus, because obviously it's quite a big piece. But it just gives it that nice, slightly rough and ready effect. That is exactly what I'm looking for. There we go. And bear in mind, we're going to do weathering on this as well when we do the rest of it. So that's going to do me quite nicely for there, I think. What I'll do is just very quickly drag this brush along the edge, because it's still got some paint left on it. Just drag this brush along the edge here to pick up this edge. And sometimes when you're doing something like this that you want to look a bit rough, and not, you know, like a showroom finish, you can just get heavy with it. Like this big old brush, I've just used it to spackle that. Now I'm just getting heavy with it. And what I'm trying to do as well, if you look, is I'm actually dragging it from the edge here down to that edge. So what I'm doing is, because there's not much paint left on this now, I can just catch it here and maybe just add one last little bit of fading. If you see, I'm doing it like this. One last little bit of fading to the main round area while I'm highlighting that edge. And that's all what this is about. All what this is about. Wow. Did I go all kind of chav? What this is all about. I wanted to try some techniques. And this technique worked really well. If I want, you know, theoretically, if I wanted to make this whole mobile suit look like that, it would look probably pretty good. And I've been wanting to practice kind of dry brushing, or not dry brushing, but brushing techniques that aren't just painting paint on. So you can see here it's all kind of spackly around the bits where the pauldron points go. Pauldron points sounds like something you get from your local petrol station. But now you'll see you've got, it's not like an airbrush fade, but it's certainly a fade to the dark around the blue. So I'll go and let that dry. And what we'll do next is we'll sort out the little spiky bits. And then we'll just do this line here, and then we're done on that. So let me go and get the spiky bits ready. Back in a moment. Oh, by the way, it doesn't look quite as drastic in real life as it does on camera. It's not quite that dark blue or quite that light blue. But there you go. Back in a moment. Right, okay, time for the pointy bits, which I've decided are officially called pointy bits. For this, I'm going to get just silly, basically. I decided to have some fun with this pauldron. So we're going to use some AMIG 190 old brass. So let me just give it a good shake. Now with the metallics, you have to make sure with these metallics, you have to give them the really good shake, best shake you can give them. Because unlike the normal colours, the pigments are heavier, because there's metallic pigment in there. So it can sink to the bottom, so it's always good to shake the living bejesus out of it. So we don't need much, that'll do nicely for the moment. This I'm just going to use neat, no mixing shenanigans. I'm going to get myself a brush of the dry brushing, and for that I'm going to use my normal silver dry brush just because it's been used a million times before. fact, that's not the one, that's the one. I could use a normal brush, but the thing with dry brushing any metallic is you're going to end up with metallic stuff in your brush, and it's super hard to get rid of. So it's always good to keep metallic brushes and non-metallic brushes apart. If you've got ones that you use, particularly like this one, I use for metallics all the time. So we're going to take some of this old bronze. Going to get most of it off on the tissue. Don't know if this will work. Might do. Might look like ass. Well, let's find out. And this is just straight over the black primer, the one-shot primer. Let's see what happens. Let's see if it's in focus. Let's see if we can do it on camera. I got news for you. There is no camera. Okay, so we'll try doing it up and down. Down from the top. I'll do it down from the top because that's probably logically where most of the damage will be. So I'm just trying to do it whilst there's a stick in the way. Do it as a dry brush. Instead of just painting this, because painting it would look fine, but you just have then a bronze looking piece. I often find that with any metallics, not just the ammo ones, but any metallics, if you want to get the smoothest kind of coat possible, instead of airbrushing them, try dry brushing them. It does sometimes give you the most wonderfully smooth colour. I don't mean like a smooth coat with no brush marks, I mean like the smoothest colour. If you know your metallics, you know that when you tend to airbrush them on, some colours will have a lot of grain to them. They'll be kind of bitty. You'll see all the little particles. But you'll often find that if you take the same colour and dry brush it, somehow that miraculously makes all that go away. So I'm just going to give that the dry brush all over. Okay, and for the last colour on here, it's time to dry now, so it's that nice kind of bronzy colour, old bronze, strangely enough. For my last colour, my favourite MIG paint of all actually, AMIG 191 Steel. I know the number by heart now. Really nice colour. So it's going to be a dry brush again, most of the paint off. And for this, we're just going to hint, we're just going to suggest very lightly at the top, at the very top, just a little bit, very subtle this, and this is just to give that kind of slightly lighter tarnished look. And then we're going to do the bottom here around this bottom edge, and it just mutes the bronze colour a little bit and gives it that slightly more metallic twinge. I don't know why, it just seemed like a good idea. It gives it more like a steel colour that's got some brown tinge to it rather than just a bronze with some steel on the top. So there you go, you can see now, compare the two. You've got, instead of just having a steel colour here on the right, hopefully it's all coming out, the lighting's not too harsh, instead of having just a steel colour, or just a bronze colour, you've got a kind of hybrid of the two with steel with a hint of bronze in it. So I'll go off and do the rest of those too. I was trying to paint some designs on this pauldron, like a triangle or a shape, or you know what, trying to paint triangles and stripes on a really curved surface like that, yeah, I gave up. I gave up trying to mask off. It just never looked right. So yeah, that's going to do it for that. So we're going to get these put on, and then we shall move on to, once that's done, that's the pauldron done then. Oh no, we've got to the edge. So we'll get these tips done, we'll do the edge on that, then we'll go on to the decals. So back in a moment. Okay, for the last step now, you can see I've already done one coat. We're going to make this edge of the pauldron metallic. Now for this, we're not actually using an ammo product, we're using a standard silver metallic Sharpie. Any other paint pens will do, but I just find these really handy now. I know it's not an ammo product, but for this kind of nice, crisp, straight edge, you can't beat a pen compared to a brush. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with using pens. Now what I've done is I've always done one coat, so I'm just going over it again, but you want to keep the pen kind of at an angle to the flat surface. It's a nice crisp edge, so you don't want to go top down because you'll just gouge it everywhere. And I did slip over it one bit, but I can touch that up later. And what you want to do for your second coat, because I've done one coat already, is very lightly, almost no pressure at all, just kind of touch the pen to the surface. Go slowly. And it does give you this really nice kind of burnished or sort of steel look, as if you've just taken a piece of steel or aluminium and just milled it and cut it. Now obviously there's weathering to go over this, so don't worry if it looks a bit rough around the edges, that's absolutely fine. Again, with that bit where I slipped earlier on. It is just the best way, I find a pen is the best way to get a nice crisp edge. You could brush this, but it's a challenge, and frankly the way I am at the minute, with my not had a cigarette in 3 days and I'm drinking more coffee than is humanly possible, I don't trust my steady hands to be that steady. So a couple of coats of this and we should be done. So all that remains now is to put the pointy things, TM, back on here, give it a gloss coat, and then it can go into the pile with the rest of the parts and armour parts for the decals, which I shall show you shortly. And then that will do us for this episode, I think. Okay, right, so that's that done. So you can see it does give quite a nice effect. Other paint pens are available. It would be absolutely kick-ass if Mig decided that what Ammo need to do is make a load of water-based paint pens. These are obviously solvent-based or whatever they are, I don't know, Sharpies. You can get Uniposca paint pens, which are brilliant. They're water-based and they're completely opaque. So if they, if Ammo ever brought out a range of pens, I'd be in like a shot. Because it is a really quick and simple and easy way of getting a nice straight edge. Now this is going to be weathered and everything else, so it won't look quite so clean, but it just breaks up the difference between the green and the blue, and I'll need to touch that bit in there where I screwed up. So that's going to do it for the pauldron. We'll get the pointy bits on when they've dried enough, and then we'll go on to the decals. So back in a moment. Right, so change of plan. I was going to show you applying this decal on the head, but it turned out to be a living nightmare. And required lots of fussing and fartassing about, and it's still not fully settled down yet, so I'm going to show you a different decal instead. And the least tiny decal I can find is one that goes under here, and it is that one, a little sort of emergency rescue thing. So here's how we're going to do these decals. First and foremost, like I said, this is one sheet of decal, it's not individual, so if you wet this they'd all come off, so I need to trim the decal down. So that's what we're going to do first. Right, so it's really bright now, I know, but we'll have to live with that. Okay, so you can see the decal there, it's the arrow and the square and the thing. So I need to trim around this as best I can. So hopefully you'll be able to see this without my hands being in the way. Because I want to minimise the amount of film that's actually visible when I put the decal on. It's not been taken care of for me. So let's just try very carefully, cutting as close as we can. Some people can actually cut right against the artwork. I'm not quite that skilled. I'd just cut into the artwork if I did that. It would be a disaster. So let's just cut around that. Cut around that box. So you can see they've got the little edge. Here I can cut. I don't want to really cut this, so what I'm going to do is lay the blade against the card and just push it down and rock it. And drag it a little bit, and that way I make sure I get a nice straight edge and I don't risk damaging the decal. This probably isn't coming out on camera, so I do apologise. For here, I can do a line there, and then a line along the arrow. Oops. And then I can just make those join up. If I can stop it whizzing off across the table. There. So now we have, if you can see that, a decal that's much neater, and it's got a lot less film around it. Because third-party decals, they don't use really subtle film like Bandai or the Cartograph decals you get in a lot of kits, which is beautiful quality. Third-party decals, often the Alps printers, and they're not the best in the world. So, yeah. So anyway, let's do this now, shall we? To make sure everything's in focus for you. Colour balance all over the place. So now we have the decal. Now we're not going to be dipping this in water. We're going to do a different technique completely. We're going to be using microset and microsol, which are massively zoomed in. No one in the world can tell you the difference between these two because nobody understands them, not even the people that made them. Basically, all you need to know is microset, the blue one, is the one you put on first. Microsol, the red one, is the one you put on once the decal's on and dry. They both are designed to soften the decal and make it conform better to irregular surfaces and set more like a painted detail rather than a decal. So I'm going to take a brush. I'm going to get a very small pair of tweezers. The decal here, see? Again, apologies if it's all blown out on the white balance. There's not much I can do because of the shininess. So what I'm going to do is take my brush, take some of the micro set, the blue one, and on the back of the decal, I'm just going to put micro set on there. This is instead of water. I'm going to put it on. You can be reasonably generous. That will absorb through the paper and to the other side of the decal, where it will hopefully act the same as water and start to free the decal. So if I turn that over and get it on camera, where are you? There you are. Hello? Are you there? Right, so that's going to sit there for a moment. Now, it can take anywhere from a few moments to a few minutes using this method, so do exercise patience. It can be frustrating when it doesn't all happen at once, especially if you're watching on video. Sorry about that. So I'm just going to try it with the brush. I've dried the brush off. That is already moving. Now, some decals will move very, very quickly. Some decals will take longer. And this is really best for small decals because they move quite quick and they're unlikely to be damaged. When I did it on that piece on the head, that was a bit of a bigger decal and that was just a living hell. So what I'm going to try and do now is, if you can see it, are you on shot? Yeah. Drag the decal off to the side a bit so I've got some card to grab onto. And all we're going to do is dead straightforward. We're simply going to very carefully apply it to the model. Now you have to, using this method, it does stick pretty quickly, so try and get it lined up before you apply it. Drag the card out, use the card to hold the decal in place when you pull your thumb away, and if you're lucky, you've got it lined up and you knock the camera. If you're lucky, you've got it lined up, and that's pretty much spot on. Perfect. So what I'm going to do now is take some more micro set and carefully, don't just slap it everywhere, go over the decal, don't go over the whole area, just if you can the decal and over the very edge, just with a little bit of the micro set. I have to look at the bottle, I can never remember which is set and which is sol. I'm not drowning it, I'm just making sure I can catch the edges. Are we in shot? Yes. But making sure I can catch the edges and the micro set will run underneath, and you'll see, you might not see it on camera, but when you put the decal on the first time, you get the little silver edge to the decal. As you run the brush over, that starts to fade a little bit. Now, that's on. Now, I was lucky there because I got it lined up perfectly straight away. Sometimes it can be a bit of a faff if it doesn't line up and you have to, sometimes you might have to try and get the brush underneath the decal and then take it off and move it around. If you need to, just get the brush a little bit damp with the micro set and just find an edge and put it underneath and you can slide it around. Sometimes they'll move around quite freely. Unfortunately, bigger decals, yeah, they're going to be harder to... Oh, see, that's quite moving quite freely, which I didn't want it to do, but never mind. Can I move that with my thumb? Yeah, there we go. So I can actually move it with the brush. If you're going to push it, push the edge of the decal if you can. Not the actual decal itself. Go on, you wanted to move a minute ago. There we go. So that's on. So I'll give it one last quick touch of the set, micro set. Now what this will do, the micro set will soften it, as I said. It will also help it now flatten down nicely. I'm not putting any pressure on here. It may, with a bigger decal, it may go wrinkly and kind of go and wrinkle up and look like an onion skin. Onion skin? No, orange peel, that's the one. That's some kind of fruit or vegetable. Don't worry if it does that. If it does that, don't touch it, leave it, let it dry. It compresses the decal together. I can't do it because I'm zoomed in. It compresses the decal together and then it stretches it out again. So it may go wrinkly at first. That's absolutely fine. Let it do its thing. I'm going to leave that for about 10 minutes. When that's done for about 10 minutes, we'll come back and we'll use the micro sol. I still have to look at the bottle. It's been like 5 years I've been using this. I still have to look at the bottle every time. So we'll come back and do the micro sol in a moment. So we'll leave that to do its thing. Back in a moment. Okay, so they've had about 10-15 minutes to dry out a bit. What we're going to do now is we're going to go in with the micro sol. Now you can see they're still quite shiny. You've still got this kind of like lighter coloured halo around that symbol, but again, like I said before, we're going to be doing weathering and stuff on the top of that to fade these decals, so it's not a problem at all. There were a couple of little air bubbles that I've stabbed with a blade just to break the surface, and then hopefully this should help those settle down. what we're going to do, microsol, now these are dry, microsol is going to expand and contract the decals, help them suck down to the surface even more, hopefully. Doesn't always work, but most of the time. So I'm going to take my microsol, get my brush. I've got a different brush for microset and microsol, just so I don't get them mixed up. And all we're going to do is quite simply paint over it. Now again, as before, what you want to try and do is not really go all over the model, because like microset, this stuff can chew into your clear coat, your gloss coat, if you're using acrylic gloss coat. So try not to splatter the whole piece, just try and stick to the decal itself. Try and get it under that little bit there. Now what this will do, like I said, it'll make it expand and contract, so what you'll see straight away, or within a few minutes, is the decal will go and crinkle up and go wrinkly and look terrible. Don't do anything, don't touch it, don't worry about it, don't start fiddling with it. It's supposed to do that, it's what it does, it's its thing. It's what microsol do. As it dries out, it will shrink back down again, and it will hopefully, once it shrinks back down, conform even better to the surface to which it has been applied. That's how it works. So that's been applied. We're going to leave that for sort of another 10 minutes or so, let it dry for a while, and basically you can keep doing this step, the microsol, as often as you need it. If you've got say a decal that's going over an irregular surface, so a curved surface or around a corner or over a wrinkly thing or ribbing or anything like that, you might have to do a few coats of this just to get it to sort of settle down, because when you first put a decal on, it may not quite conform to the surface. This will make it flat down, suck down, adhere to any odd shapes. Now this is flat, so it's not so bad, and eventually it'll get that kind of painted on look. But that's all we're going to do. So I'm going to leave this for 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to do another coat, and I'll probably do 2 or 3 coats of the microsol just overall. So what I'll go and do now is do all the rest of the decals on the rest of the kit. Now, using this microset and microsol the way I've done it, I'd say that's best for smaller decals. These may be a little bit too big. You might potentially want to use water just to avoid any messing about, especially to get things lined. I was lucky to get these lined up more or less. Yeah, for bigger ones, maybe stick to water. But I'll go off and get the rest of the mobile suit decals done. And we are back. Right, well, as you can see, everything's been sort of put back together again, recombobulated. All the decals have been finished, and the secondary gloss coat has now been applied. I've put it back together like this because there's no real feasible way for me to spray the gloss coat over everything without taking the armour off again, which I didn't want to do. You'll note that I did mask off Thed, the clear parts. A very good reason for that. It's actually very easy to do because you can slip the tape down the side. If you are using a gloss varnish, I'll just put this back on here. If you're using a gloss varnish, then if you remember, what I did was originally I dipped the clear part in the gloss varnish to get that nice smooth effect. If you spray gloss varnish over a clear part, it can just go slightly foggy or frosty. It doesn't always work, so I didn't want to risk that even with the gloss varnish. So that's now masked off, and that'll stay masked off until I've done all the weathering and all the matte varnishing's been done. So then when I can pull that off, it'll be nice and shiny. Then I can do a little bit of weathering to it with some dust and stuff, because it's not going to be clean, but I want to make sure it's still clear underneath any weathering. So that's been done. One thing I did want to clarify a little bit in that last section, I didn't mention it when I was doing the filming, and I kind of forgot to mention it, but I did put the little caption up saying about where the film here, you could see kind of a lighter patch here where the decal is just the clear part. I didn't really explain that very well in the caption. What I meant was, there's 2 reasons why that might happen, or a few reasons. One is that perhaps that part of the film, that clear part of the film, these being third-party decals, isn't quite 100% transparent. So it's you're seeing that because it's not quite transparent. Now that's not a problem. The other reason might be that it's not quite flush to the surface, and so there's small pockets of air under there. And again, that's not a major problem, but that might be what's causing that light patch. The first time you see it, you might think, oh God, my microsol and microset is affecting my gloss coat underneath and it's burning it away. That's what I used to think the first time. But what actually happens is you don't need to worry about it. when you first put it down and you do your first, you know, micro set to apply it, that's what we had. We had that little white patch there with 3 or 4 applications of micro sol, sort of 10 or 15 minutes between them, maybe an hour or so for some. It goes away, and it's usually either because the microsol gets underneath the decal and pulls it down to the surface flat, so it squishes out any air, and that's how you get rid of that. That's called silvering if it's air. If you're using water, you can just squish it with a cotton bud just to get all the air out, and that will help reduce it as well. But if you like me using sol and set, you don't want to do that. So the microsol works its way underneath and gradually pushes any air out, so you lose that kind of patchy look. The other thing is, of course, if it is that just the film is a bit thicker and not quite 100% transparent, because it's third-party decals, so the quality of your clear film can vary. What the microsol does is it does eat away at that clear film ever so slightly. So with repeated successive coats, it will eventually fade that away and blend it in even more, which is how you get rid of some of the edges. Now, where there's ink on there, obviously it doesn't necessarily dissolve the ink away quite as much, so you're left with the ink and it does kind of eat away at the clear film. So if it is just that the film's a bit opaque, it will kind of dissolve that away as well. So usually just putting loads of microsol on there, 3 or 4 coats or more if you need it, will get rid of that. And you can see it's got rid of it on there as well. There is still a slight edge, you can see it in the right light, but once that's been weathered over and matte varnish, it won't be visible. In the video when I said about we'll just cover it over weathering, I kind of meant to say but it might not be there by the time we finish using all the microsol, but I forgot to say that. So yeah, if you start seeing that kind of blooming around the decal when you first put it on, don't panic. Don't panic at all. It will go away. One thing, I've also finished that I was really proud of, the decal on this helmet. The clear film around here just disappeared. Even after just 1 coat of microsol, it's just vanished. Now I really love this, because I'm really proud of the little metal bits here. They look great, but apart from the fact it looks like something like a Mario Kart, I can't help thinking, and this is where the title of this film comes from, it's like some kind of like medieval space marine kind of barbarian helmet hat thing. It's like some kind of baldric cap from some future space where everything's based on medieval nonsense. I don't know. I know what I mean when I say that. It's like some kind of rubbish medieval space hat. Yeah, there you go. Anyway, that's why this episode is called that, because all I can see when I think of that is kind of some silly bobble hat, some space bobble hat. So there you go. Space bobble hat edition. So anyway, that's going to do it. Thank you so much for putting up with this episode, with my endless prattling on, because I've not had a cigarette now for about 5 days. And like I said, I'm drinking all the coffee in the world to make up for that, because I'm trying to quit smoking. So I'm a bit hyper. So yeah, apologies. We will, in the next episode, we will get on with the actual weathering. So we'll make a start on that. The gloss coat's on there now, and it's 24 hours to dry, and that's going to protect all those decals from that weathering. But until then, go make something cool. And as always, adios amoebas. Space bobble hat.